There are moments in life you carry quietly, moments you don't share with anyone, because admitting them out loud makes them too real. The moment you realize that the heaviest weight in your life isn't your workload, your failures, or your circumstances. It's the people sitting right next to you at the dinner table, the ones who've known your name the longest, the ones who've watched you grow, and somehow, somewhere along the way, started pulling you down instead of lifting you up. The people who hurt us most are rarely strangers. They're the ones who learned us well enough to know exactly where we're soft. Maybe it's a family member whose voice alone tightens something in your chest. Maybe it's a friend you've shared years with, someone who used to feel like home, but now feels like a place you're always trying to escape. You can't quite name what changed, but you feel it every single time they walk into the room. The air shifts, your shoulders go up, your guard goes on, and the peace you spent all week trying to build quietly crumbles the moment they open their mouth. This is one of the loneliest realizations a person can have, because the world tells you to hold on, to forgive, to keep showing up, to honor history, blood, shared memories, and years invested. And so you do. You keep showing up. You keep swallowing what you feel. You keep telling yourself that maybe tomorrow will be different, that maybe you're being too sensitive, that maybe this is just how love looks sometimes. Most of us were never taught how to grieve a relationship with someone who is still alive. So instead, we keep showing up, and we call it loyalty. And sometimes it is, but sometimes it's just the absence of permission to leave. Stoic philosophy challenges that deeply conditioned silence. It doesn't say, be cold or walk away from everyone who frustrates you. What it says is that your mind, your time, and your sense of peace are not things you owe to people who repeatedly choose to damage them. Your first responsibility is not to manage everyone else's feelings at the expense of your own stability. It is to protect your inner world with the same seriousness you would protect anything sacred in your life. So today, let's talk honestly about 8 signs that a relationship has moved beyond difficult into something genuinely harmful. Not signs to use as weapons or excuses to abandon people carelessly, but signs to sit with truthfully. Signs that your own heart already recognizes, even if your mind keeps finding reasons to look away. What makes this so difficult is that most of these signs don't look like harm. They look like family dinners. They look like old friendships. They look like love that just needs a little more patience from you. The first sign is that they consistently make you feel small. There's a particular kind of pain that doesn't announce itself with dramatic arguments or obvious cruelty. It sneaks in through the side door. It lives in a raised eyebrow when you share something you're excited about. It lives in the half-second pause before they respond, the one that tells you they're choosing their angle, not their words. It hides in the laughter that comes just a fraction too quickly when you describe your dreams. It wears the costume of humor, honesty, and tough love. But underneath all of that, what it's actually doing is chipping away at your belief in yourself, one small comment at a time. Some wounds don't bleed, they just make you quieter over time. You share good news, and instead of warmth, you receive a quiet comparison to someone who's done more. You talk about a goal, and they walk you through every reason it probably won't work. You watch their face as you speak, searching for something that resembles pride, and what you find instead is a kind of patient tolerance. You start to notice that you hesitate before sharing anything real with them, because somewhere inside you already know how it will land. So you edit yourself. You shrink your excitement down to something manageable. You learn to present only the parts of your life that won't give them material to work with. Psychologists sometimes call this self-silencing, the gradual process of suppressing your thoughts and feelings to avoid a negative response from someone close to you. It begins as self-protection. It ends as a habit you don't remember forming. You stop sharing not because you have nothing to say, but because experience has taught you what happens when you do. Marcus Aurelius understood this. He wrote that the behavior of others reflects their own inner condition, not yours. A person who consistently dims your light is not offering wisdom. Whether they're aware of it or not, they are protecting themselves from the discomfort your brightness creates in them. Belittling is almost never about the person receiving it. It is almost always about the insecurity, the unprocessed envy, or the quiet desperation of the person delivering it. The most dangerous part is not any single comment. It's the slow accumulation of them. Because eventually you stop needing them to say it out loud. You start saying it to yourself. You begin to wonder if your goals really are too ambitious, if your ideas really are that naive, if maybe they're right and everyone else is just being polite. That is when the damage is deepest, when their voice becomes the voice inside your own head, when you catch yourself shrinking an idea before it's even fully formed, and you realize you don't know anymore whether that doubt belongs to you or to them. Anyone who consistently makes you feel foolish for wanting more does not belong in your inner circle. That's not love. That's erosion dressed up as honesty, and that erosion connects directly to the second sign, because once someone has made you doubt your worth, the next thing they often refuse to do is acknowledge the damage they caused. The second sign is that they never, not once, take responsibility for anything. You have been in this conversation before. You raise something that genuinely hurt you, and somehow by the end of it, you are the one apologizing. You came in with a specific concern and left holding a long list of your own past mistakes, none of which had anything to do with what you originally said. You try to address a pattern, and suddenly the entire history of every mistake you've ever made is on the table. You hold them accountable for something specific, and they look at you like you've lost your mind, like the events you both lived through happened in completely different universes. The cruelest thing someone can do after hurting you is make you feel unstable for noticing. People who refuse accountability are not confused. They are not simply bad communicators. They are engaged in a very specific kind of self-protection that comes at a very specific cost to you. Every time they deflect, rewrite the story, go silent, or turn your concern into an attack against you, they are communicating something important. They are communicating that your feelings are not real enough to deserve a genuine response, that your experience of events is less valid than their preferred version of them. Researchers who study conflict behavior have identified a pattern sometimes called DAVO, where a person responds to being held accountable by denying what happened, attacking the person raising the concern, and then repositioning themselves as the real victim in the situation. It doesn't require conscious intention. It just requires someone who is more committed to protecting their self-image than to acknowledging your reality. Epictetus wrote that a wise person examines their own judgments before questioning the world around them. Someone who spends every conflict proving that nothing is ever their fault is not growing. They are standing still in their own blind spot while expecting you to walk around it indefinitely. Over time, you start carrying weight that was never yours to carry. You apologize to keep the peace. You question your own memory. You find yourself replaying conversations alone, trying to identify where you went wrong, even when something underneath the confusion keeps telling you that you didn't. You are not too much. You are simply in a dynamic that requires you to become less in order for them to feel sufficient. And that is not a relationship. That is a slow erasure. The third sign is that they only remember you exist when they need something from you. The calls come when they're in crisis. The texts arrive when they need advice. The warmth shows up when they're lonely, overwhelmed, or bored, and just need someone to absorb what they're carrying. And you pick up. You always pick up. Because that's who you are. because you genuinely care, because you remember the version of this relationship that felt mutual, and you keep hoping that version will return. But hope, when it's directed at someone's potential rather than their pattern, stops being optimism. It becomes a way of staying somewhere your own experience has already told you to leave. Pay attention to the silence between their needs. That silence tells you everything their words won't. Where are they when you're the one struggling? Where is the check-in on an ordinary Tuesday when nothing is wrong? When you have good news, do they celebrate it, or do they let it land for exactly one moment before steering the conversation back toward themselves? Seneca wrote that real friendship is built on character, not convenience. A person who only reaches for you when they're running low is not choosing you. They are choosing what you provide. And while it might feel like loyalty to keep being available, what you are actually doing is teaching them that you will always be there, regardless of whether they ever show up for you in return. A relationship with no reciprocity isn't a relationship. It's a role you've been cast in without being asked. Your energy is not an unlimited resource. Your presence is not public property. And recognizing that someone treats you like a vending machine rather than a human being is not being harsh. It is being honest about something that has quietly drained you for longer than you want to admit. We tend to measure relationships by how long they've lasted, but duration is not the same as depth. A relationship can be 20 years old and still be entirely one-sided. Length of time is not evidence of genuine connection, it's just evidence of time. The fourth sign is that they treat your boundaries like they're negotiable, or worse, like they're something to laugh at. You've tried to set them. You've said clearly and honestly that something doesn't work for you, that something hurts, that you need a different approach. And instead of being heard, you were told to relax. You were told you were being dramatic. You watched their expression shift from mild irritation to something almost amused, like your discomfort was an overreaction they didn't have time for. You were told it was just a joke, that you're too sensitive, that you need to stop taking everything so personally. What that response reveals is not a misunderstanding, it reveals a preference. Their comfort in crossing your line matters more to them than your comfort in having one. Boundaries are not walls, they are not punishments. They are simply the honest expression of what you need in order to feel safe and respected in a relationship. When someone refuses to honor that, the issue is rarely that they don't understand. It is that understanding would require them to change something they have no intention of changing. Marcus Aurelius wrote that dignity is protected through action, not argument. A boundary that is explained endlessly but never enforced teaches the other person that the boundary isn't serious. But a boundary that is quietly, calmly, and consistently protected through your own behavior, through what you allow, what you participate in, and how close you let someone get. That kind of boundary speaks a language that doesn't require a debate. When someone has made it clear that your limits are a joke to them, the most powerful thing you can do is stop offering explanations and simply let your distance speak instead. Silence in that moment is not withdrawal. It is a boundary finally being kept. The fifth sign is that something in them changes when things go well for you. This one is painful to name because it often involves people you deeply love. But envy is real, and it is quiet, and it is present in more relationships than most people are willing to acknowledge. You can feel it. It doesn't always show up as coldness. Sometimes it shows up as a comment that arrives just a beat too late, or enthusiasm that sounds slightly rehearsed, like they reminded themselves to be happy for you. The congratulations comes with a slight flatness. The encouragement arrives wrapped in a subtle doubt. Or they match your win with a story about their own struggles in a way that manages to make your good moment feel somehow inconsiderate. The shift is the thing to notice. not what they say, how the room feels the moment you share something good. Whether they recognize it in themselves or not, your growth can hold a mirror up to something they haven't dealt with in themselves. Marcus Aurelius wrote that envy is born not from another's success, but from one's own unaddressed pain. The person who stiffens at your progress is someone who is carrying something unresolved that has nothing to do with you. Understanding that doesn't make the sting go away, but it does help you stop internalizing it as your problem to manage. The danger comes when you start editing your joy to protect them from it, when you stop sharing your wins, when you lower your voice when something good happens, the way you'd instinctively turn down music if someone nearby looked uncomfortable. Some people aren't against you, they're just so lost in their own pain that your happiness feels like a reminder of something they haven't found yet. That's not something you can fix, and it's not something you should shrink yourself to accommodate. Your life does not belong to their comfort. Your growth does not owe anyone an apology. Surround yourself with people who look at your rising and genuinely smile. Those people exist, and you deserve to know what it feels like to be celebrated without conditions. The sixth sign is that you cannot relax around them. You are always performing a calculation. Before you say something, you run it through a filter. Will this start something? Will they take it the wrong way? Will I spend the next 3 hours managing the fallout from this one sentence? You choose your words carefully, the way you'd move through a room in the dark, arms slightly out, not sure what you might knock over. And what is devastating about that is how normal it starts to feel. You forget that you're doing it. It just becomes how you exist around this person. This is what researchers who study close relationships sometimes refer to as relational hypervigilance, a state where your nervous system has learned to treat someone close to you as a source of unpredictable stress, and so it stays on alert even when nothing is visibly wrong. It's not anxiety in the general sense. It's your body's very specific response to a very specific person. And the fact that it feels normal doesn't mean it is. Epictetus taught that the greatest loss of freedom is not external, it is internal. It is the moment you begin measuring every word, every expression, every emotion through the lens of someone else's reaction. When you cannot be yourself around someone without bracing for consequences, you are not in a relationship. You are in a performance. And performing for someone who should know you better than anyone is one of the most quietly exhausting things a person can endure. Healthy relationships hold room for your real voice, your actual opinions, your honest feelings, your imperfect expressions. They do not punish you for being human. They do not weaponize your honesty or use your vulnerability against you later. If you feel relief when they leave the room, if you feel like you can breathe again when they're not around, that relief is not dramatic or disloyal. That is your nervous system returning to a state it couldn't access while they were present, and baseline should not feel like a reward. The seventh sign is that they treat your time, your energy, and your commitments as though they don't matter. They're consistently late without acknowledgement. Plans get cancelled at the last minute without real apology. They expect you to drop everything and be fully present for them, but become unavailable the moment you need the same. They interrupt your work without hesitation, as if whatever you were doing couldn't possibly be as important as whatever they need right now. They minimize your responsibilities and somehow manage to make you feel guilty for having a life that doesn't revolve entirely around theirs. Seneca wrote that we guard our possessions carefully, but allow our time to be wasted without a second thought, even though time is the only thing we can never get back. Someone who routinely disregards your time may not think of it as disrespect, but the effect is the same. They have, through consistent behavior, communicated that their priorities outrank yours, not in words, in pattern. You start accommodating, you rearrange things, you apologize for having plans. You feel a small, familiar guilt for being unavailable, as if your own life is an inconvenience you owe someone an explanation for. That is not humility. That is the slow surrender of your own autonomy. Your time is your life made visible, and the longer you rearrange yourself around someone who never rearranges for you, the more you begin to quietly absorb the idea that your time simply matters less. That is perhaps the most lasting thing they teach you, and the hardest to unlearn. The eighth sign, and perhaps the most honest one, is that you feel like yourself again the moment you step away from them. This is the one people are most reluctant to admit, because it feels disloyal. Because if distance brings you peace, what does that say about the relationship? It says everything. Not about your loyalty, about the cost of what you've been enduring. We are taught to ask what we can do to save a struggling relationship, but a more honest question might be, who do you become when you're around this person? Because that answer, observed over time, will tell you more than any single conversation ever could. Pay attention to how your body feels after spending time with this person. Do you feel lighter or heavier? Do you feel like you, or like someone who's been performing a version of themselves for hours? Do you need time alone afterward, not to recharge the way anyone sometimes does, but to remember who you actually are before you walk back into your own life? And notice how you feel on the days you don't interact with them. Is there a quiet relief, a softness in your chest, a sense that you can think more clearly, breathe more fully, be more present? Your peace will always reveal what your patience has been covering. Marcus Aurelius wrote that what aligns with your nature brings harmony. What does not brings disturbance. When someone's absence feels like recovery and their presence feels like bracing, that relationship is costing you more than you've allowed yourself to calculate. You don't fully understand the weight until you've put it down, and then you stand there for a moment, surprised that you carried it for so long without realizing how heavy it actually was. This is not about becoming someone who walks away from everyone who is difficult or imperfect. Real relationships require patience, grace, and a genuine willingness to work through hard things. But there is a difference between a relationship that goes through hard seasons and a relationship that has become the hard season itself. There is a difference between someone who struggles and someone who has quietly made your peace the casualty of their comfort, whether they intended to or not. Not every cage has bars. Some have shared history. Some have guilt that was handed to you so gradually you forgot it wasn't originally yours. You are allowed to love people from a distance. You are allowed to create space without cruelty. You are allowed to decide that certain relationships, regardless of their history, are no longer ones you will pour yourself into without limit. That decision does not make you cold. It makes you someone who finally understands that you cannot give from a place of empty. The Stoics did not teach detachment from love. They taught discernment about where love is placed and at what cost. Your inner world is the one place that belongs entirely to you. Guard it, not with bitterness, with the quiet, unshakable clarity of someone who has finally stopped negotiating their own peace. Real love does not ask you to disappear into it. It makes room for you to remain yourself within it. That distinction, small as it sounds, changes everything. Distance does not destroy real connection. It only makes visible what was always true. And if stepping back from someone brings you back to yourself, then stepping back is not loss. It is return. It is the beginning of something far more honest than what you were holding on to before. Choose yourself. Not out of selfishness, out of the understanding that you cannot be genuinely present for anyone, not truly, until you stop allowing others to take what was never theirs to take in the first place. Some relationships don't end with an argument or a door closing. They end quietly, with the slow recognition that who you are when you're with this person is someone you no longer want to be. And the grief that follows is real, even if no one else understands what you've lost. You're not mourning the person, you're mourning the version of the relationship you kept believing was still possible. That grief deserves to be honored. And then, when you're ready, set down.